And we are live. We have a very special guest, somebody that I consider to be a paisan, even though he's not Italian. I consider him to be that. It's General Ben Hodges, the former commander of U.S. Army Europe, who I've had on the No Delusion Zone several times. I know that, Jonathan, you've also interviewed Ben several times. We're both very, very happy to have him back. There's so much going on. We could, and we talked about this off air, we could talk for hours. We won't, I promise you, not now anyway. But there's just so much. So, Ben, welcome, first of all.
Well, thanks to both of you, two of my heroes that you both run great programs that give people a chance to talk about things in some detail. And that's why you both have so many followers and people listen to what you do. So thanks for the privilege.
Well, you haven't been on this before, so we came up with a name, I think last month, Jonathan, the Dictators, and that's the actual name of the series of live streams, because there's certainly enough dictators to go around, and we do this once a week, and we're very, very happy with it. For the folks that are watching it for the first time, please tell your friends, colleagues, and friends about this series, about the Dictators that Jonathan and I do once a week. Usually in live stream. It's live stream now for me on my YouTube channel. And please tune in, subscribe, tell others to subscribe. And while you're at it, subscribe to my channel. And before I forget, because I never put this in, before they run out, please take a look at this. There's not many of them left. If you want a really nice coffee cup in the morning to wake you up and to think about things that are happening, I would suggest you get the Trump as the dictator, the same old you know what. And these are going fast. There's not very many of them left. So here's to you. Please go to my website to order them, which is protectingtherepublic.com, www.protectingtherepublic.com. And you too can have a Trump as dictator and the same old shiza, and be the talk of your friends. So, Jonathan, why don't you kick it off while I drink from my Trump cup?
Let's kick off, because it seemed that when we last spoke, Ben, we were deep in this sort of conversation about this highly performative peace process, and it was flooding the news headlines. Come January, it's vanished. I mean, it's not even being mentioned by the administration. It's dropped out of the media. Of course, we have Venezuela, we have Iran. I mean, I can't say that Trump's behind what's happening in Iran, probably not. But nonetheless, this talk of performative peace has just vanished entirely. Does that suggest to you that that's what that process was, that it never had a likelihood of achieving anything, and perhaps that wasn't even the purpose of that sort of carousel of delusions?
I think that the administration's approach to the peace process was doomed from the beginning. I think, as you and I have discussed, because they never understood, or else they never cared about the origin of the conflict. I mean, even Vice President Vance said, he referred to that as details on, how it started. If you're trying to solve a war, understanding how and where it started, it would seem to be an essential part of that process. And then the approach to putting all the pressure on the Ukrainians, on President Zelensky, versus putting pressure on Vladimir Putin as well, I think was wrongheaded. I remember when Secretary Rubio, in the opening days of the administration, when he was asked about this, he said, well, Ukraine's going to have to give up some territory. That's the opening salvo of a negotiation from, that's not quite art of the deal, I don't think. And so then they had, Mr. Witkoff and Jared and all these other people that were, I think, outplayed by the Russians time and time again. So not a surprise to me that it has not really developed into something, at least as far as I can tell, that has legs. Now, credit to the Ukrainians for stopping the Russians. I mean, the Russians cannot defeat Ukraine, but Ukraine at this point doesn't seem to have the capability to push Russia out. So there is sort of I hate to call it a stalemate, because it doesn't feel like a stalemate, but neither side can defeat the other at this point. And I think Ukraine has to continue along with the peace process, even though I don't believe they actually trust the U.S. administration to do anything. They surely don't trust the Russians to live up to any agreement. And so, this is why Europe, I think, is having to, as they should, take on more of a part of this. And the administration would prefer not to be associated with a failed negotiation.
And it begs the question when we look at the amount of funding. This is what I usually do. I usually talk over David and get a supplementary question in. But if you look at the funding, the US was the single biggest country provider of aid in 22, 23, 24. Not every single quarter, but if you average it out, then US aid was more than 50% in that entire period. In 2025, apart from stuff that had been previously sort of mandated by President Biden, it's dropped to zero. It's dropped to absolute zero. It's as close to zero as you can calculate. It's off the chart entirely. What therefore gives Trump the right to be center stage in this peace process when he has no real skin in the game?
Excellent question, and I have wondered too. Why does anybody care what he says if he doesn't have the leverage? Now, I think President Zelensky, of course, wanted to at least to continue the process so that the Americans did not become outright adversaries in this process, that they would at least allow European countries to continue to provide or sell equipment, ammunition, etc., to Ukraine. So I think he had to stay involved in that process. Plus, I think some European countries would be more willing to continue supporting Ukraine if they believe that Ukrainians actually were involved in a peace process of some sort. Their populations and parliaments, I think, would expect that. But in terms of real leverage, I don't see what the Americans have, what we have. Now, there probably is some intelligence sharing, but I just don't know what it is. And I shouldn't know what's being provided. And of course, I keep hoping, and perhaps President Zelensky and Europeans keep hoping, that the president will finally get really pissed off at Putin when he finally realizes that Putin has no respect for him or his administration, that they've been stringing them along, and clearly doesn't care about anything that we would all recognize as a just, sustainable peace. And so when the president finally realizes that, I kept hoping he would get mad and do something. But so far, he's talked about things, and has never come through.
Well, I don't think he may get pissed off at Putin, but that passes. He gets upset with a lot of people. He calls them names and does this, that, and the other thing. But I don't think he's ever going to get to the point where he's going to be so angry at Putin for more than about 12 seconds that he's going to actually take any concrete action. But let's stay on Ukraine for a few minutes. What do you make, if anything, about the recent change in the Ukrainian defense minister?
So what I have seen was a positive response from people that pay close attention to this. I don't know enough to make a judgment, but obviously having a person that is respected, that's trusted by President Zelensky, that's trusted by the military leadership, but also by allies and partners, is going to be important. Whoever it is, though, I mean, Superman could not do that job 3-4 years. So it probably was time to make a sort of a change anyway. And, this famous book, Team of Rivals, where Lincoln put together his cabinet during the American Civil War, and all the people were people who had run against him before the war. And he ended up finding these characters who were all talented and was able to make it fit. And so I think President Zelensky is doing what he should do, which is continue to work to find the right combination of senior leaders, both in uniform as well as the civilian side, and getting General Budanov into his new position also gave me that was an inspired choice, I think, And I can't wait to see Budanov sitting across the table from the Russian negotiators and them knowing that he's responsible for the disappearance of half of their neighbors.
Mhm. And by Russian negotiators, you're not referring to Witkoff and Rubio, or
Well,
They're
you
not
know,
negotiators.
they probably would also feel a little bit uneasy because they will assume that Budanov knows everything, as I would assume.
Ben, as you know, the Ukrainians have been incredibly innovative with their technology, with their inventiveness, especially in relation to drones. They recently had a massive drone attack on the Belgorod area again, and they attacked the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure there. And I don't know, the numbers range from 500,000 to 1 million Russians that are without water, without power, and so forth for several days. I have mixed feelings about my next question. I want to know your opinion. The Russians have been just brutal war criminals from the beginning in terms of attacking the Ukrainian energy infrastructure and civilians in general. And the war criminals, that's all you can say about that, war crimes. What do you think about Ukrainians retaliating, not exactly in kind, but certainly to attack the infrastructure that will affect the opinions, I'll say, of the Russians when they have to shiver in the night in the dark? What do you think about that?
So I support anything that Ukraine does that helps them defeat Russia. Now, they don't have endless amounts of resources to just shoot at everything that they want to hit. So they have to prioritize what gives them the best effect. And we know from our own experience in World War II, in Korea, in the war in Vietnam, that strategic bombing alone never, ever was going to win the war. I mean, Great Britain survived the German strategic bombing. That's not the way to win. Punishing the civilian population usually does the opposite. It makes people more determined. So, of course, the Ukrainian general staff, they know this. I think that and by the way, I spoke to a Ukrainian colleague this morning, and she said it was -10, where she was at. And she said they were lucky because she was in a village. Their family lived in a village outside of the town. So they were not affected by electricity going out because their house was heated by gas. And it was easier for them to do that. But she said, people that live in the towns and in the larger cities, of course, it's miserable, which makes it even more impressive that Ukraine has been able to actually increase their own industrial output despite the continuous disruptions to the power infrastructure. So what does that have to do with, going after Russian power grid? I think anything that minimizes Russia's ability to produce more drones or ammunition, anything that that goes after their logistics infrastructure that they need for moving ammunition and people around, I'm 100% for it. And I do think that the Ukrainian theory of victory includes, to a large extent, destruction of Russia's oil and gas infrastructure so that they cannot export to get their financial resources. I don't cry a tear for Russians who might be super cold in their house, but I don't think that will lead to them, marching on the Kremlin with pitchforks, demanding that the war end. I just don't think that makes a difference. So Ukrainians, I don't imagine that they're launching attacks just for the sake of making the Russians suffer. If that's a side effect, I'm all for it.
And there's an interesting Second World War example, isn't there? Because until the Arctic convoys, developed alternative techniques that could deal with U-boats or at least reduce the attrition rate, and until Goering changed his tactics from bombing cities, actually bombing airfields, and then went on to bomb cities, Britain was in a very precarious position for a short amount of time. And if Germany had stuck to effectively hitting our supply lines and resources, they may well have actually brought us to our knees. So
Yeah.
there's something here in the Ukrainian strategy. And this week we've seen, for the first time, and I'm surprised it's got so little coverage, how many times have we said that through the war? It hit not just vessels that are demonstrably part of the Grey Fleet, it hit 2 Greek-registered tankers that are not sanctioned vessels, but which were heading towards Ukrainian port, to Russian rather, a port at Novorossiysk. So do you see the Ukrainian strategy now to really tighten the noose around Russia's resources?
Yes, I think that is the theory of victory. If Russia is not able to export oil and gas to China, India, Turkey, other customers, then I don't know where they get the resources to continue to pay bonuses for these poor kids that live out in Tatarstan or Yakutia or wherever they're still recruiting people, or to pay factory workers. I mean, as I was preparing some research, thanks to you, Jonathan, you were helping me, by the way, for this thing I was going to do, trying to be able to counter this narrative that somehow Russian victory is inevitable. Then you start looking at the economic impact of what's going on, and that convinces me that Russian victory is not inevitable. In fact, it's much more likely that Russia is going to collapse at some point. I just don't know when. I mean, I have been mocked and criticized before for being too optimistic that Russia was going to collapse, and I deserve it. But I don't know how they can make good on what Ukraine has done to the oil and gas infrastructure. And now that Ukraine is willing to go after tankers, by the way, the Greeks, NATO country, EU country, shame on them for allowing their ships to be a part of this. So I think that I think the Ukrainians would have thought through all the implications of this, and I think it's entirely acceptable. I mean, I saw today that the UK is looking at now seizing Russian tankers and selling the oil and using the proceeds from that to help fund Ukraine. I mean, this is the right kind of thinking if we're serious.
I'm going to throw a curveball in here because I like to push the envelope a little bit on speculating what may happen. But if we take this position that Russia is not able to make any serious traction on the battlefield, we now have, through a sort of drone warfare, a zone of almost absolute transparency for 25 to 50 kilometers now with the fiber optic drones. That means you're unlikely to see any kind of even Russians were capable of it, any kind of maneuver warfare. And after they've taken a few sort of little villages in the tail end of last year, it's now really open space to the next big conquests. And having seen how that unfolds, directly myself, I really can't imagine they're going to be able to make much advance. If they cannot do that, Putin does need something. He needs something to weaken allies of Ukraine, and he needs something to try to coerce them into cutting off Ukraine's resources and support. Therefore, what would you say to the hypothesis that, one, Greenland is perhaps a strategy that may well assist Russia greatly in that distraction and diversion of attention and military resource, but also that Russia may well step up hybrid attacks at scale this year, because that's the only thing they actually have leverage over, and it is extremely cost effective.
On the hyper attacks, is that what did you say, or
hybrid attacks? Yeah, hybrid attacks. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I hadn't thought of the Greenland connection, although if you've got the United States and European countries are at odds with each other in a very serious way over Greenland, that will distract energy and attention and perhaps even resources away from support for Ukraine. I can't imagine that Russia is not happy to see this own goal by the United States effort. The hybrid attacks, I think, until the Russians suffer any consequences, are absolutely going to continue. These gray zone operations that they're doing with drones and sabotage, disinformation, assassinations, all the different things that have been happening in several of the European countries, yeah, that's going to continue until they pay a price for it. And that means that European countries would have to acknowledge that Russia is at war with us, even if they're not launching Kinzhal missiles against other European cities outside of Ukraine. They clearly are at war with us, and so until we acknowledge that, then governments will not have the sense of urgency to do what needs to be done to actually inflict consequences, both economically, kinetically, or somehow. Stopping Shadow Fleet vessels going through the Baltic Sea is the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, that should not be too hard to figure out a way to do it. And I can imagine that we're starting to move closer towards that. But the Russians, I believe, will continue to do that until they are stopped from doing it. And right now, I think they feel confident they're not going to be stopped.
And indeed, Berlin was hit by a huge power cut, which is not being directly attributed to Russia, but it's not difficult to imagine that various proxy groups and front groups, either extreme leftists or extreme right-wing organizations, may have a dotted line to Russia, and certainly it meets their strategic purposes.
Yeah, I think that's entirely plausible. And that was a significant outage. Went on for quite some time. I think I told you I had my own experience back in July on the train from Den Haag, from The Hague, headed back home to Frankfurt after the NATO summit, and there were like 5 or 6 different trains that were hit that same day between Schiphol Airport and The Hague and Utrecht, that were not devastating explosions, but it was clearly a sabotage that wrecked the power connection to the rail cars with the overhead wires. That was a scary sound and experience, and of course we all ground to a halt. That kind of stuff goes on, and it's not. I don't think it's just coincidence that there were 5 of these that happened all at the same time.
I want to follow up on a couple of thoughts that both of you had. One is on the always imminent collapse of the Russian economy and the Russian military. And the economy is going to get worse. I have no doubt, the Russian economy. But as both of you know, the Russian people are pretty resilient in their, I won't call it stupidity, but in their traditional historic ability to take abuse, to be able to suffer. Suffering is just part of being a Russian. That's in their DNA. We are born to suffer. And they look at Putin as the czar. And I'm sorry, it's going to take a heck of a lot. Because Jonathan and I both have people in Russia, whether family or friends, that can back this up. It's going to take a heck of a lot for the pitchforks to go to for the Kremlin and the bonfires. I think we're nowhere near that. And, the Russian people are going to put up with this for a long, long time. Having said that, I can't say the Russian economy is going to last that long. It is, as Jonathan knows, and I'm sure you do too, Ben, it's a refrigerator economy. When they walk to the refrigerator, if there ain't nothing there, they're pissed, and they may then go to the streets. But we're not there yet. I mean, especially in the big cities. They have their supermarkets and stores and malls are stocked as well as they ever have been on purpose. That's where all the money's going, so they don't get upset. Having said that, I want to echo what I saw you say, Ben, in some recent podcast about being upset with Europe and constantly the European leaders saying that they don't have enough money. Oh, we can't do this. We can't make it alone without the United States. We don't have the money. We don't have the military. We don't have the defense industry. BS. Of course they do. However, my question is, because I agree with you, I've written and spoken about the lack of political will in Europe. That's all. They have the money, they have the military, they have the defense industry. If they had the political will, my question is, if the AfD does as well as many project it will do, at least in some of the state elections, and they may be able to gain more power at the federal level, what is this going to mean for the support of Ukraine and for the build up of the German defense industry and the Bundeswehr?
Okay, so that was
it's a long-winded way of asking. If the AfD wins, what's going to happen?
Well, first, I do want to touch on this Russian suffering thing. Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs never seem to suffer, or the videos of their daughters shopping in Milan or down in Saint-Tropez, they never look like they're suffering. So that suffering depends on where you are and who's responsible for it. Both of you guys have so much more firsthand knowledge of Russia than I do. So I'm not challenging that. But, I do think about when the Soviets had left Afghanistan. I mean, supposedly a lot of that was because mothers kept showing up complaining about their sons that were dying there and for what purpose. So I don't know if that's just the narrative I heard or if that actually had some sort of impact. And when people stop getting paid bonuses, or the families of the soldier that was killed don't get their latas anymore, maybe there will be some impact. I just don't know. But I haven't met anybody. Maybe you two guys are the exception. I have not met anybody that could tell me that, yeah, 1998, next year is the year the Soviet Union is going to collapse. I have not met anybody that predicted that was about to happen. I was stunned myself, happy, but stunned. So I don't know that we're going to see a gradual crumbling of Putin's power, or if it's going to be a sudden sort of thing, or I don't know. But I think we should be preparing for that possibility. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I started talking and I forgot the original point of your question.
But surely we can
AFD
was there, yeah.
Yeah, if my long-winded
AFD, right.
Deutschland, what's going to happen? What's this in Zukunft?
It's nothing good for Ukraine or most of Europe if right-wing parties that seem to be the biggest or most popular parties in the countries now, like AFD or Reform or Marine Le Pen's party or others, that tend to be, if not openly pro-Russian, they certainly are not pro-Ukraine. And so that'll be a problem. But if we're serious about our democracies, then you have to win elections. You have to put forth the better program. Friedrich Merz and his coalition, they don't have a big margin at all. It's a somewhat fragile coalition, but at least that coalition is held together by the fact that they know that if the coalition is not held together and there's another election, that it would be impossible to keep AFD out of government. So they're aware of that, and they know they have to deliver. France is certainly not an expert there, but I've been hearing about Macron's downfall for a long time, but he is still there. Jonathan could talk about impact of reform and what's going on in UK better than me, but at the end of the day, you have to deliver. On the other hand, it looks like, touch wood, that Orban could very possibly be defeated in Hungary. Same for Fico in Slovakia. So you have to win elections.
And of course, the Greenland thing could, it's like shaking up the kaleidoscope. If these things are not certainties, reform, AFD, all this other kind of stuff, Le Pen, then throwing in an operation like Greenland, whether it's intentional or not, and actually it's a stated part, as we discussed in one of our podcasts, it's now a stated part of US foreign policy to try to facilitate right-wing takeovers in Europe and diminish the power of supranational organizations such as the EU. So the very effect of a potential Greenland venture, it might harden elections behind traditionalists and people who, let's say, are aligned with the old world order, the ones which I think we would align with, but equally it could have the opposite effect. It could be weaponized so that it accelerates this authoritarian slide. To my mind, that actually makes an adventure in Greenland more likely, because it seems to align with some of the stated objectives that have been crafted by, one presumes, people like Stephen Miller, and others.
So I don't know the outcome yet of the meeting today between the Danish and Greenlander foreign ministers and Secretary Rubio. President Trump certainly has not shown any willingness to back away when he says you can do it the easy way or the hard way, or it's unacceptable for us not to be in control of Greenland. But perhaps there's ways that he can claim that U.S. has control without actually having to transfer sovereignty or something like that. Whatever the outcome is, so much damage to American credibility and how when people trust us, so much damage has already been done. The fact that an American president would be openly pursuing this, and that certainly with the support of his administration. On the other hand, I do see some members of the Congress, including Republican senators, that are saying this is ridiculous. Knock it off. Saying Miller should be fired. He has no idea what he's talking about. Although they're still reluctant to criticize the president, but at least some of the old GOP senators are pushing back on this because they all see that this is stupid and it's only hurting us. But the Europeans also, they have agency here. The bases that we get, that the UK and France and not France, but Spain and Italy and Greece and Turkey and Germany allow us to have for our land, sea, and air forces, the intelligence sharing that we do with all of our allies, the business connections, that's not guaranteed. And so I think if European countries come together, that they could remind the United States of what we lose for Greenland. Totally unnecessary. Now, I would say that I like the idea of NATO or European countries together saying, okay, if the U.S. is really concerned about security of the Arctic or Greenland, we're going to do something about it. U.S., you helped us for the last 80 years. You helped us rebuild after the war. You protected us. We're going to protect you. And we're going to deploy capabilities up here to help protect Greenland, which you say is essential to American security. Of course, what they'll find is that there are almost zero Chinese and Russian vessels up there, but that would make the point. And I think most serious people realize this is not about security. This is about the administration trying to implement this 18th century style Western Hemisphere is ours. We're a great power, therefore we're going to use great power because we can. And that's what it's about. I don't know that plays well in an election year with the Congress.
Ben, there's so much to go over, and you can't stay with us long enough. And so I have to blow by Venezuela. I had a ton of questions about that and some comments, but I would like to get your comments about the domestic situation going on here in America, which of course affects the entire world, at least the Western world, but the entire world. There's some really dark things going on right now in America in terms of federal troops, federal agents, rather, federal law enforcement agents and National Guard troops and some federal or active duty military being deployed on the streets of America. We had what is being characterized as a murder in Minneapolis that's still up for debate as far as whether it was in fact a murder or self-defense. But the comments after that from the Trump administration is that they are going to double down. And essentially what he said, and I'm paraphrasing very, very close, that if you shout, if you disparage, if you diss federal agents on the street, that could be subject to being shot, the death penalty. That's pretty much what he said, that agents have a right to do that, and that they are immune. They are immune from any prosecution. I believe that was J.D. Vance, or I believe it was J.D. Vance that said that. What are your thoughts in terms, if you want to just talk about the military aspect of this, or just from a national security standpoint, what the hell is going on right now in our country?
Well, of course, it's very hard for me as an American living overseas to watch this, and um, I mean, it's gut wrenching. I read Heather Cox Richardson every day, and today she wrote about exactly what you just described, and I was like, oh my God, it's hard to watch, and what's really discouraging is when the president says, maybe she was not a terrible person, but she was very rude to those cops or to the ICE, as if that somehow, therefore, you can do what they do. That's never been okay. And real law enforcement professionals are appalled at what they see because they're, number one, they get tainted with it, but also they're properly trained. They understand the importance of they have license and capability to use force, but they know that that's not how to do the job, except in a very, very few situations. So the fact, these guys are not immune, by the way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be covering their face and changing license plates and doing all these things to avoid detection. I was surprised how quickly the name of the ICE person who shot Miss Good, how quickly his name got out there. So I don't think that any of them should assume that they are immune. Now, I'm also waiting for senators from, the senators from Minnesota, for example, to begin to disrupt Senate business until this gets resolved in Minnesota or in Illinois. I mean, an individual senator has an awful lot of ability to stop nomination processes and other Senate business. So there is leverage there. They just got to figure out if and when they're going to use it.
Ben,
Now,
are we close to martial law? This is a military question. In your opinion, from what you're seeing, is this agitation on purpose so they can invoke the Insurrection Act and declare martial law and put active duty military on the streets of America?
Well, first of all, I remember we're talking about Minnesota here. The courts have said they had to pull out of Illinois. So we're talking about a pretty unique, specific place. I think ICE is not about immigrants. This is about intimidation and to create some fear so that as we approach November, they would be able to discourage or suppress voting. Because right now, in a normal time, the Republicans know they're going to get killed in November in the midterm elections. So, I mean, that's why Trump last week said, you guys have got to win, otherwise I'm going to get impeached. That would not inspire me to work harder, but if I was a Republican congressman, but I do think this is part of a process to intimidate people, particularly minorities, but not only. But that's not my area of expertise. With the military, I think that the vast majority of soldiers, regardless of their political leaning, they understand that their oath is to the Constitution of the United States, and that it should be ingrained in them about their role vis-a-vis use of force and civilians. I mean, even as a cadet, I learned about posse comitatus and, my responsibilities with the Constitution and following orders and not following unlawful orders. I mean, back in the 70s when I was a cadet. So this is not going to be news for them. But I have to believe that the senior leadership of the military is going to be pushing back the way General Milley did about the use of force against our fellow Americans. And I think the government knows that too. The administration knows that too. Otherwise, they wouldn't have created these ICE monsters to have them doing what they are doing. I do think that there's also a huge debate going on inside the Pentagon, and I certainly hope there is, about Greenland. I mean, Article 6 of the Constitution says that any treaty is the law of the land. And so anything that violated the Washington Treaty, which created NATO, would be a violation of our own law. Therefore, a tasking to the Joint Staff to come up with a plan to seize Greenland, that would be an unlawful order. It certainly, in my view, I'd like to have a professional legal opinion on that, but it seems to me if the Washington Treaty is the law of the land, then doing something against NATO allies would seem to me to be an unlawful order.
But we
So
prosecute people for talking about the Geneva Convention, about not following unlawful orders. That's verboten here.
well, it's very interesting. Of the 6 members of Congress who made that video, Senator Kelly is the only one that has been singled out for any kind of action. And I think that could be because he's the most visible, most well-known, or because they see him as a potential political opponent come the next presidential election. Or maybe it was just because he's the only one that actually is retired, and therefore you could do some things. But they've already shown, the Secretary of Defense has already shown their incompetence. You can't take a guy who's been retired, bring him back on active duty, and then try to reduce him in grade for something that he did not while on active duty. So, I mean, they really are, and for sure they didn't want to do a court martial because they would have been exposed as total idiots. So Senator Kelly, I think his popularity goes up every time Secretary Hegseth tweets something stupid about this. And I think that's going to backfire on them.
And I wanted to do a quick follow-up because I know we're approaching the end, but it's just to sort of take this out. Someone I follow, and he reminds me a little bit of David here. He will go to the extremes, which are seen as absolutely, pushing the envelope to a wild extent, and then unfortunately reality catches up, and it turns out that that's what was happening all along. I watched Malcolm Nance as well, and he's been listing some of the implications that if Greenland was invaded and if Europe put up some form of kinetic response, what the implications are. One would be Europe and indeed many other countries like Canada dumping US Treasury bonds, which would be a significant crash to the currency and the economy, combined with the coercion talked about earlier of taking over the Federal Reserve or trying to take apart that central bank governance means it would be a very risky time for that kind of chaos. But then there's insulin, a lot of which comes from Denmark. There's Maersk, which has huge logistical reach. And the implications are extraordinary.
Yeah, and the issue is, does this administration believe that Europeans have the backbone to actually do that? I think there's a level of hubris in the administration that is very dangerous. And right now, they're feeling like they can do anything. They grab Maduro, they're threatening Greenland, they've bombed Iran, they've done all these other things, and they feel like we can do whatever we want. Until the other side starts saying, well, wait a minute. And you just, what you and Malcolm have identified, those are examples. So much of the intelligence that we depend on does not come from American satellites. It comes from British intelligence, German intelligence, Norwegian intelligence, Danish intelligence. And that's based on trust. And, those relationships have been built up over 8 or 9 decades are being shattered right now. The base at Ramstein, that Ramstein is essential for everything the United States does in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. That's not U.S. territory. That's German territory. Same for Incirlik in Turkey. The base in UK. If the Brits had not let us fly stuff in there, we would not have been able to do this famous tanker seizure, a few days ago in the North Atlantic. So these are
the
all
only base in Scotland that can service service US nuclear submarines outside their home port. So again, that was just shut down.
Yeah, all of these things would damage us, and I think that there are people in the administration that either don't understand that or don't believe it, or they're scared to actually go to the president and say, Mr. President, this is going to be the biggest own goal in our history. If you continue this, we're going to lose this, and this. And then, of course, the financial things that you mentioned that will be so damaging. Europe is our biggest trading partner as a bloc. And if Europeans could work together on this, you'd be eye level, what the Germans would call Augenhöhe, eye level, peer in terms of economic power. So we should be very careful. We're going to regret the damage that we are causing through what is, at the end of the day, absolutely unnecessary.
We do have to wrap it up, but I want to say, Ben, I do agree that we, the Americans, will pull through this. It's going to take a long time. This is a generational change because of the incredible amount of damage that Trump and MAGA folks have done, but we will get through it. I am not, however, as optimistic about what's going to happen with Greenland. I don't think there's going to be a military invasion of Greenland by the United States, but I'm not sure what's going to happen. But I don't think it's going to be good. He's like a dog with a bone. He doesn't want to let this go. He is extremely incompetent, and the people around him, except for Miller probably, are not that incompetent. They're scared. They're just deathly afraid of insulting Trump to the point of trashing the U.S. Constitution, our national defense, our allies, and everything else. I think that's the problem. So they're going to do whatever he says. Last word, Ben, and then I know you've got to go. Please.
My feeling, and maybe this is just what I want to believe, but I'm not so sure that Republican members of Congress are going to be as scared of him this year as they were last year. I mean, they can see the president's popularity is dropping. They know what inflation is like in their own districts. They know what unemployment is like in their own districts or states. They can see all that, regardless of what the president might be saying, and they're hearing from voters. And so that's why so many of them have announced retirement or are starting to speak up. So you don't have to get all of them, just got to get a few to begin to push back. And it's no fun to be in Congress if you're in the minority. And so you've got Republican members of Congress that realize that they probably are going to lose control of the House come November, and they don't want to be in the minority on that. So I think they're either going to do what they need to get reelected, even if that means pissing off the head of their party. I don't know that. I'm not a political scientist, but that's what it feels like to me. And I see enough pushback. And then there's reports that the president is extremely unhappy with his attorney general because, they're not prosecuting all of his political enemies, which I can't even believe that's a thing in America. But you got a bunch of prosecutors quit in the Department of Justice this week because they refuse to be a part of that. So it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. But I think we have too many good people in America that are going to let us just keep driving down. And I look at Jonathan. Our European allies and friends are going to have to help save us from ourselves. I mean, stand up. Please stop flattering the president. Please, no more tours, no more royal treatment, no more this and that. It doesn't work. It absolutely does not work. And I think, rediscover your own strategic backbone, stick together, and make us live up to our own talking points, follow our own law. And you've got a lot of ways to do that. Whatever, if somebody is being mistreated. I spoke to a friend today who's, let's just say, a European, whose husband's an American, and she's got to go back to the States soon to keep her green card current. And she says she is absolutely dreading it. She's dreading going back to that. And a German friend said, who's had the chance to go back for a big medical thing, said, no way in hell. I don't want to go back. What? How does that make America great again? If really talented people don't even want to go there, or they don't want to send their kids to school there. Had a lady the other day tell me her daughter's, probably is trying to decide to go to the U.S. or Canada. And her mother's like, please don't go to the U.S. That's bad for us.
Dark times, Ben. Like I said, look, I agree that we're going to get out of this. We are. How long? I don't know, but we will. And assuming we have elections this fall. And I'm sorry, that's still debatable. Assuming we have elections, the Democrats will win, in my opinion, and things will start to get better, but that's still iffy. I wish we could go on. We could rope you here or handcuff you to the chair or something and keep you here for several hours.
I'll tell you what, I will take that bet. If we do have elections in November and Democrats take the House, you come to London, Jonathan picks a pub, and you buy for both of us.
You got it. You're on.
That's
you
a
are
deal.
on. You are on. Ben Hodges, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, retired former U.S. Army Commander of Europe. Thank you so much. And my co-host Jonathan, thank you so much as well. Thank both of us. Please look for us next week, same time, which is noon Eastern Standard Time on Fridays. Please subscribe to my channel, No Delusion Zone, on YouTube, as well as protectingtherepublic.com, my website. Jonathan needs no introduction, but I'll say it anyway. The Silicon Curtain, he would love you subscribe as well. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We have to go. Take care, and we'll see you all very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.